Isabella Wells sat stiffly in the leather chair, her black dress pressed neatly against her knees. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of polish and old paper. Her brother, Daniel, leaned back with a smirk so wide she wanted to slap it off his face. "I'm getting the house and the company," he declared, puffing up like a king addressing his court. "She just gets the dolls." Laughter broke out around the table. Their aunts chuckled, cousins snickered, and even their stepmother covered her mouth as if it were the funniest joke she had heard all year. Isabella's hands curled into fists in her lap. 10 years of sacrifice, of running the company when Daniel was too busy chasing pleasures around the globe, and all they saw when they looked at her was a woman with a collection of toys. "A dollhouse suits her," Aunt Margaret chimed in, dabbing the corner of her dry eyes with a tissue. "She was always Daddy's little princess. Daniel understands real business." Isabella's teeth sank into her tongue until she tasted the metallic bite of blood. Real business. Daniel had never read a contract, never balanced payroll, never stood on a construction site in boots that sank into the mud. He wouldn't know a steel beam from a broomstick. She kept her face calm, her eyes down, because experience had taught her that defending herself in this family was like shouting into the wind. They only heard what they wanted. Daniel adjusted his designer tie, basking in their approval. "Isabella can keep playing with her toys. Father always said the company needed strong leadership." Before anyone could laugh again, Mr. Harrison, the elderly lawyer, cleared his throat. His kind eyes flicked toward Isabella, and for the first time that afternoon, she saw a glimmer of something. Anticipation, maybe even justice. "Actually," he said, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the mockery, "the company was never in Daniel's name." Silence fell like a dropped hammer. Daniel's grin faltered. Isabella felt a warmth rising in her chest, something fierce and long overdue. Growing up as the youngest child in the Wells family meant Isabella had been trained early to stay quiet. Her father, Thomas Wells, was a man of steel and grit who built the construction company from a single truck and a worn-out toolbox. Her mother, Caroline, had passed away when Isabella was 12, leaving her to grow up surrounded by men who measured worth by muscle and bravado. Daniel, 5 years older, was the golden boy. He played football, dated the prom queen, and sailed through school with teachers calling him a natural leader. Meanwhile, Isabella spent her afternoons at construction sites, shadowing her father, learning the difference between concrete mixes and zoning codes. "Isabella's good with numbers," her father would say at family gatherings, half proud, half dismissive, as if her sharp mind was just a curious trick. "She keeps me organized." What he didn't admit aloud was that she was already solving problems he trusted to no one else. Daniel, meanwhile, strutted around at parties, talking about leadership and vision, while Isabella was in the office at midnight making sure suppliers got paid. Even as a teenager, she could walk onto a job site and spot a safety hazard in seconds. Daniel, in contrast, had only visited sites twice in his life, complaining about the dust both times. Still, her father clung to the image of Daniel as heir. "When I retire, Daniel will take over," he would announce with a proud grin, and the room would nod in agreement. To them, leadership looked like charm in a suit. To Isabella, it looked like unpaid overtime, negotiation calls, and emergency site visits. She told herself that one day, her sacrifices would be recognized. That one day, someone would see how much she had given for the family business. But sitting in that mahogany-paneled office, with Daniel smirking like a crowned prince, she wondered if that day had finally come. She remembered the hospital room 3 months earlier. The sharp smell of antiseptic. The steady beep of monitors. She had held her father's rough hand, the hand that once carried beams and tools, now frail and trembling. "You've been my right hand, Bella," he whispered. His voice cracked with both pain and pride. "You understand this business better than anyone." Tears had blurred her eyes, but she squeezed his hand. "Don't worry about the company, Dad. I'll take care of it." His gaze shifted toward his old leather briefcase in the corner, the one that never left his side. "The dolls," he murmured. "Not just sentiment. Remember that." At the time, she hadn't understood. Now, as Mr. Harrison flipped open a thick folder, her father's words returned like an echo. Your father transferred ownership of Wells Construction to Isabella 5 years ago, the lawyer said, his voice calm, deliberate. She has been the legal owner ever since. The room froze. Daniel's smug smile shattered. That's impossible, he barked, his voice wobbling. I'm his son. I was meant to inherit the business. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. The will today addresses only Mr. Wells's personal estate. The company has belonged to Isabella since 2019. You can't be serious, Daniel stammered, color draining from his face. She's just the bookkeeper. The words hit Isabella like a slap. 4 years, she had been dismissed with those 2 words. Bookkeeper. As if managing multi-million-dollar contracts, negotiating with unions, and rescuing projects from disaster was just balancing a checkbook. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She wouldn't explode. Not here. Mr. Harrison continued, his tone unbothered. In fact, under Miss Wells's leadership, the company's value has grown by 40%. The silence in the room thickened. A cousin dropped his coffee cup with a loud clatter, but no one moved to clean it up. Aunt Margaret's mouth hung open. Even Diane, their stepmother, blinked in shock. Daniel's hands shook as he pointed at Isabella. This has to be a mistake. She can't run a business. Isabella finally lifted her eyes to meet his. Her voice was steady, quiet, but it carried through the room like steel. Strange. I've been doing it for 5 years while you were off finding yourself in Thailand. Daniel's jaw fell open, but no words came out. The family shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter curdling into confusion. Thailand, Aunt Margaret whispered. I thought you were there for business retreats. Isabella almost smiled. Yes. He was finding his spiritual center while I was handling a $20 million project about to collapse. Mr. Harrison nodded in confirmation. Her efforts saved the company from bankruptcy. That is why your father secured the transfer when he did. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. Father would never. He told me I was destined to lead. He said it countless times. Isabella's eyes hardened. He said it to you. He listened to me. There's a difference. The lawyer cleared his throat. Your father valued both of you, but when it came to protecting Wells Construction, he trusted Isabella's proven record over anyone else's charm. A ripple of discomfort ran through the room. Daniel's face flushed crimson. Let's discuss the rest of the estate, Mr. Harrison continued, ignoring Daniel's tantrum. Daniel inherits the family house, though it carries an outstanding mortgage of $300,000. He also receives your father's personal investments, which were depleted in recent years to cover certain expenses. Isabella caught the lawyer's careful glance at Daniel, who stiffened. Everyone in the room knew those expenses were Daniel's failed ventures and luxury trips. The antique doll collection, Mr. Harrison announced, goes to Isabella along with full appraisals. Daniel burst into harsh laughter. See, at least some things make sense. She gets her toys. He looked around for agreement, but no one joined him. Isabella tilted her head, remembering her father's hospital words. Not just sentiment. Her heart skipped. Mr. Harrison, she asked calmly, would you please read the appraisal details? The elderly lawyer's eyes twinkled. Certainly. The collection includes 47 pieces, among them several rare Jameau dolls from the 1870s and a complete set of early Madame Alexanders. The last appraisal, conducted last year, valued the collection at $512,000. Gasps erupted. Someone's fork clinked against the glass table. Daniel's smirk vanished as if erased by a storm. $500,000, Aunt Margaret whispered. For dolls. Antique dolls are serious investments, Mr. Harrison explained. Each piece has historic significance. Miss Wells's great-grandmother began the collection in the 1920s. Each generation added carefully curated items. Your father was proud of Isabella's knowledge of their value. Isabella felt warmth spread through her chest. She had been the only one who listened to her grandmother's long stories, the only one who cleaned and catalogued the fragile porcelain. What once seemed like a quirky duty now revealed itself as foresight. Daniel's voice cracked. So let me get this straight. Isabella gets a business worth millions plus $500,000 in antiques, and I get a house drowning in debt. Diane, their stepmother, attempted a weak smile. You also get father's pickup truck. Her words fell flat. Even Isabella had to suppress a laugh. Daniel stared at her, panic pooling in his eyes. For once, the golden boy looked small. The company, Mr. Harrison added, was valued at $2.3 million as of last month. Under Isabella's management, profits have climbed steadily. Isabella's breath caught, but she kept her face composed. Daniel's complexion turned greenish as he tried to do the math. 2.3 million plus $500,000 more in antiques. He had nothing to counter it with. No claim, no success, no dignity. This can't be legal, Daniel shouted. There must be a loophole. She must have tricked him. Isabella finally stood, smoothing her skirt. Her voice rang with calm authority. I didn't trick anyone. I earned this. Every late night, every contract saved, every worker paid on time, that was me. While you were posting beach photos, I was running the company. She pulled a thick folder from her bag. And I have the records to prove it. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, studying her documents with admiration. Comprehensive indeed. Your father mentioned your habit of documentation, but I didn't realize the extent. Isabella's gaze swept across the room, resting briefly on each stunned face. I learned long ago that in this family, if you don't document your work, someone else will take the credit. Daniel flinched. The silence that followed wasn't just shock anymore. It was the heavy recognition that they had underestimated her all along. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. So what happens now? His usual arrogance had drained away, leaving only fear. Isabella looked at him. This man who had coasted his entire life on charm and family name. For a brief second, she almost felt pity. Almost. Now, she said softly, you figure out how to make your own way. Just like I did. She closed her folder and slid it back into her bag. The lawyer shifted the papers in front of him. Shall we continue with the remaining details? His calm tone only deepened the tension in the room. Daniel sat stiffly, as though his chair had turned into stone. Isabella nodded. Please go on, Mr. Harrison. For the first time in her adult life, she felt exactly where she was meant to be. In control, acknowledged, and finally respected. As executor, Mr. Harrison said, I must confirm that Miss Wells assumed all business debts and obligations 5 years ago. She has not only maintained them but expanded company value by 40%. That kind of stewardship is rare. Isabella caught the flicker of pride in his eyes. Daniel muttered something under his breath, but no one dared ask what it was. His collapse was already visible enough. The lawyer closed the file. That concludes the reading of the will. For a moment no one moved. Then Aunt Margaret blurted, This isn't fair. Daniel was always meant to inherit. Everyone knew that. Isabella turned her head slowly toward her aunt. Fairness. I gave up my 20s to save this company. I lost friends, relationships, and sleep. Daniel lost nothing. He only collected. Her voice was calm, but the sting in her words made Margaret flinch. Diane tried to recover the family's pride. Your father loved you both, she said quickly. But perhaps he made a mistake keeping all this hidden. Isabella shook her head. He knew exactly what he was doing. If he had told you earlier, would you have supported him? Or would you have torn him apart for believing in me? Silence answered her. Not one person could meet her eyes. Daniel gripped the edge of the table. This isn't over. I'll contest it. His voice shook, but he forced it louder. Mr. Harrison folded his hands. You can contest the will, but you cannot contest the company transfer. It was completed 5 years ago. Courts do not reverse decisions like that lightly, especially when the company has thrived under current management. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He had run out of weapons. Isabella rose from her chair. Her movements were graceful, steady, almost ceremonial. Mr. Harrison, thank you for your clarity. Then she turned toward her brother. Daniel, I appreciate your minimal contributions. Her lips curved in a thin smile. But Wells Construction isn't hiring. Gasps echoed around the room. Even Mr. Harrison raised his brows at her boldness, though his mouth twitched as if holding back approval. Daniel staggered to his feet, his fists trembling. You'll regret this, Isabella. You can't handle all this on your own. Isabella tilted her chin upward. I've been handling it on my own for years. The only difference now is that everyone finally knows it. She turned toward the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Each step sounded like punctuation to her independence. In the hallway, whispers erupted. Aunt Margaret hissed to Diane. She must have schemed this. Diane muttered back. Or maybe Thomas wasn't as blind as we thought. Isabella kept walking, her head high, refusing to shrink under their venom. She had endured years of their dismissal. Their whispers no longer cut her. If anything, they fueled her. Isabella, wait. Daniel's voice cracked behind her as she reached the elevator. Gone was the confident air, replaced by a desperate man. She turned slowly, her eyes cold but steady. We need to talk about this, he said. His tone begged rather than commanded. For once, Daniel Wells stood before her not as the golden son, but as a man stripped of privilege. Isabella pressed the elevator button, her voice calm and final. Talk. Daniel, I've already said everything that needed to be said. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Isabella stepped inside, her posture tall and unyielding. Daniel lingered in the hallway, his hand half extended as if reaching for something already out of his grasp for the first time. He seemed aware that charm and entitlement would not save him. Bella, please, he tried again, his voice cracked and small. The doors began to close. Isabella met his eyes one last time. You'll have to learn to stand without leaning on me, she said, and the doors shut between them. When she reached the lobby, the weight of years lifted from her shoulders. The family upstairs could stew in their disbelief. She had no intention of waiting for their acceptance. The receptionist gave her a curious smile, clearly aware of the drama that had unfolded. Isabella only nodded politely and walked out into the Portland air. The sky was gray, rain threatening, but for the first time in years, she felt the sun breaking through inside her. Outside, she paused on the steps. For a decade, she had worked in the shadows, carrying the business on her back while others dismissed her as an assistant. Today, the truth had been laid bare. Her father had trusted her with his life's work, and she had already proven she was worthy of it. She whispered softly to herself, I did it, Dad. I really did it. Her phone buzzed. A message from one of the site supervisors. Problem with the crane at Riverfront build. Need your approval to bring in backup equipment. Isabella typed a quick response, her fingers steady. Prove it. Safety first, budget later. Business as usual. Except this time, she wasn't managing in secret. She was doing it openly as the rightful owner. Upstairs, chaos reigned. Daniel paced the lawyer's office, pulling at his hair. There has to be a way around this, he shouted. Diane rubbed her temples. Daniel, screaming won't change facts. Aunt Margaret glared at Mr. Harrison. How could you let this happen? The lawyer folded his hands patiently. I don't let things happen. Follow instructions. Thomas Wells was clear about his wishes. His tone carried finality. No amount of protest could change the ink on those documents. Father never trusted her more than me, Daniel muttered, his voice wobbling. Margaret leaned forward. Then why did he sign everything over to her 5 years ago? The question silenced even Daniel. He had no answer. Deep down, perhaps for the first time in his life, he knew why. Isabella had earned what he only assumed was his by birthright. Meanwhile, Isabella drove toward the riverfront site. Construction noise rose in the distance, hammers striking steel, engines humming. The sound was music to her ears, a rhythm she had known since childhood. Workers waved when she pulled up in her modest sedan. "Boss!" one of them called, grinning. The word struck her differently now. It was no longer in secret, no longer temporary. It was hers. She walked the site with practiced eyes, spotting safety gaps and design adjustments within minutes. A young worker stumbled while hauling equipment. Isabella rushed forward, steadying him. "Careful," she said warmly. "You're no good to me injured." The man flushed with gratitude. Unlike Daniel, who treated workers as tools, Isabella saw them as people. People who built the well's name brick by brick. After hours of site inspection, she climbed back into her car, exhaustion tugging at her bones. Yet it wasn't the draining fatigue she used to feel. This was different, lighter. For the first time, she wasn't fighting for recognition. She was leading without apology. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Isabella Wells?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, speaking." The caller's tone shifted into something professional. "This is Miriam O'Connor from the Portland Historical Society. We've reviewed the appraisal documents for your grandmother's dolls. I'd like to discuss a potential partnership for an exhibition, and possible auction if you're open to it." Isabella's breath caught. Her father's cryptic words about the dolls weren't just about heritage. They were about opportunity. She smiled faintly. "Let's talk." That evening, Isabella sat at her kitchen table with the appraisal folder spread before her. Photographs of porcelain faces stared back at her, delicate, eerie, and priceless. She traced her finger over a Jumeau doll in a silk gown. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Every piece has a story, Bella. Treat them well and they'll take care of you." She finally understood. The dolls weren't just sentimental trinkets. They were investments her grandmother and father had safeguarded for her future. Her phone buzzed again. "Daniel." She let it ring twice before answering. His voice was rough, stripped of arrogance. "Bella, we need to talk." "I can't lose everything." Isabella leaned back, her tone calm. "You didn't lose everything, Daniel. You never had it in the first place." Silence filled the line. For once, he had no witty retort, no self-assured laugh. Only quiet desperation. "Maybe we can work together," Daniel tried. "You run the day-to-day, I'll handle clients." Isabella closed her eyes briefly, remembering every meeting where he had taken credit for her work. "No, Daniel. That era is over. You've had chances, more than anyone else. You threw them away." His breath hitched like a child denied candy. "So that's it. You're cutting me out completely." "You cut yourself out years ago," Isabella said, her tone cool. "I just stopped fixing it for you." Before he could respond, she ended the call. She sat in silence, listening to the hum of her refrigerator, the rain beginning to patter against the windows. For years she had dreamed of this moment, standing tall, no longer fighting to be seen. Yet the reality was sharper, lonelier. Power was heavy, but it was hers. The next morning, Isabella met with Miriam O'Connor at the Historical Society. The curator's eyes gleamed as she examined photographs of the collection. "Do you realize what you have here? Museums would fight to display pieces like these. Some of them haven't surfaced at auction in decades." Isabella folded her arms. "I knew they were valuable. I didn't know they were historic." Miriam smiled. "They're both. You're sitting on a gold mine, and a cultural treasure." Back at the Wells construction office, employees gathered in the conference room. Rumors from the will reading had spread quickly. Some looked nervous, others excited. Isabella stood at the head of the table, her voice steady. "You've all probably heard by now. Yes, I've been the owner for 5 years. And yes, nothing changes, except this time I won't be in the shadows. A murmur of approval swept through the room. One of the senior foremen, Joe, raised his hand. "Boss, we already knew. You've been running things. Paperwork didn't matter to us." Isabella felt a lump in her throat. For years she had been dismissed by family, but here in this room she was respected. "Thank you, Joe," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." The workers nodded, their loyalty clear. Unlike Daniel, she didn't have to demand respect. She had earned it. Meanwhile, Daniel spiraled. He sat in the empty family house, surrounded by unpaid bills and the echo of promises he couldn't keep. Mortgage notices piled on the kitchen counter. The pickup truck broke down within a week. He called contacts, tried to pitch himself as an entrepreneur, but the doors he once walked through so easily now shut in his face. Without the company's name behind him, Daniel Wells was just another man with excuses. Late one night, Daniel showed up at Isabella's door, rain dripping from his suit jacket. His eyes were bloodshot, his pride shattered. "Bella," he whispered, "I don't know what to do." For a moment, Isabella's heart tugged. This was her brother, the boy she had once looked up to before arrogance corroded him. But then she remembered every time he had mocked her, stolen her credit, left her to clean his mess. She shook her head slowly. "You learn. That's what you do." Daniel's voice broke. "Please. I'm your brother." Isabella's eyes softened, but her words stayed firm. "And I'll always wish you well. But wishing doesn't build foundations. Work does." She closed the door gently, leaving him on the porch. Inside, she leaned against the wood, her chest heavy but steady. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the shadow to Daniel's spotlight. She was the architect of her own future. Weeks passed, and Isabella settled into her role with a new kind of authority. Contractors who once bypassed her for Daniel now came directly to her. Clients who had doubted her called with respect in their voices. At the office, decisions flowed more smoothly without her brother's constant interference. She realized the truth her father had seen all along. Leadership wasn't about inheritance or charm. It was about persistence, grit, and vision. One Friday afternoon, she received a letter from a prestigious investment group. They wanted to expand Wells Construction into new states and were offering a partnership worth millions. Isabella sat in her office, the sun slanting across her desk, and allowed herself a rare smile. Her father's faith had opened the door, but her own hard work had kept it open. The doll collection also began to transform her future in unexpected ways. Miriam O'Connor arranged for a public exhibition, drawing collectors from across the country. Crowds filled the gallery, marveling at the rare porcelain faces and the meticulous preservation. Reporters approached Isabella for interviews, their questions circling not just around the dolls but around her role as a young businesswoman revitalizing her family's legacy. As she walked through the exhibition one evening, Isabella paused before the Jumeau doll her grandmother had once cradled. She whispered softly, "You weren't just dolls, were you? You were lessons. Patience, care, attention to detail." In that moment, she understood that the collection wasn't separate from her business life. It was part of it. Both required vision, steady hands, and the courage to see value where others saw nothing. Daniel, meanwhile, drifted from one failed scheme to another. He sold the family house to cover debts, but the money evaporated quickly. Old friends stopped answering his calls. Even his once admiring cousins avoided him at gatherings. Pride had been his armor, and now it lay in pieces around him. Sometimes Isabella heard whispers of his struggles, but she chose not to chase them. Everyone had to walk their own road. One rainy evening, she found a letter slipped under her office door. It was from Daniel. "Bella, I'm sorry. I never saw what you carried. I thought being the chosen one was my right. I was wrong. Maybe one day you'll forgive me." Isabella read the note twice, her emotions tangled. It wasn't victory she felt, it was release. For years she had chased validation. Now she no longer needed it. At the next company banquet, Isabella stood at the podium before her employees, clients, and partners. Her voice carried across the room with quiet strength. 5 years ago, my father trusted me with Wells Construction. Today, I stand not just as his daughter, but as the leader of a company that belongs to all of us. Together, we've built something that will outlast all of us. Applause thundered through the hall, shaking the chandeliers. After the speeches, a young woman approached her. An intern from the university program Isabella had recently started. "Ms. Wells," she said shyly, "I just wanted to thank you. Seeing you lead. It makes me believe I can do it too." Isabella's throat tightened. She rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You can. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." In that moment, Isabella realized her leadership was bigger than her family's approval. It was about paving the way for others. Late that night, she returned home and placed the appraisal folder back in her father's old briefcase. She whispered into the quiet room, "You were right, Dad. The dolls weren't just sentiment. They were a reminder that hidden value always finds the light." She closed the briefcase and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in decades, the Wells legacy was in steady hands. Standing by the window, she looked out at Portland's skyline, the cranes and half-built towers glowing against the night. The city was alive, and so was she. No longer the overlooked daughter, no longer the shadow of a golden boy. Isabella Wells was her own name, her own force, her own story.